Israel's Rafael defense contractor on Thursday unveiled a new version of its anti-tank missile, the Spike NLOS. The sixth-generation missile was touted by the Israeli arms manufacturer as now having the capability to be launched in a salvo of up to 4 missiles, and an extended range of 50 kilometers, 31 miles, when launched by helicopter. The missile has a 32-kilometer, 20-mile range when launched from a ground-based system. A single operator will now be able to launch up to 4 missiles at once, which significantly increases the gamut of long-range targets that can be hit, and thereby strengthens the element of surprise, the company said.
Additional features in the latest generation of the Spike NLOS included what the company called a handover mode, where the missile can be launched by one system and then controlled by another, seamlessly. In a simulated demonstration, the company showed a scenario in which a missile is launched by a helicopter that then flies away to avoid an enemy air defense battery. A ground-based system swiftly takes over control of the missile to direct it toward the target. The company said the missile can be fed with information on the fly, using UAVs and other aircraft which are flying high above a target. In previous generations of the Spike NLOS, an operator would have to manually enter target coordinates, which the company described as a complex technical task. With the help of images provided by various electro-optical sensors, the missile locates the target on its own, marks it, and helps the operator to neutralize it more accurately and simply, the company said. It said this feature would be especially helpful when attempting to hit a specific target among other similar targets in the same area, such as an enemy commander's tank amid a platoon. The missile was unveiled ahead of the Eurosatory Defense Expo, set to be held next week in Paris.
Spike anti-tank missiles are already in use by the Israel Defense Forces, where they are used under the name Tammuz. Israeli arms sales in 2021 hit a record of $11.3 billion, with officials citing a sharp increase in demand for Israeli-made weapons. In 2021, similar to previous years, Europe was the largest purchaser of Israeli defense goods, buying 41% of total exports. Israeli companies exhibiting at the pavilion include Elbit Systems, Israel Aerospace Industries, EMI Systems, Israel Weapons Industries, and Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, among dozens of other smaller companies. According to an independent global security think tank, Israel was ranked the 10th largest international weapons exporter in the past 5 years. This article deals with the history and development of tanks of the Israeli army, from their first use after World War II in the establishment of the State of Israel after the end of the British Mandate, and into the Cold War and what today is considered the modern era. Before Israel gained independence in 1948, neither Israel nor the Arab nations surrounding it had many tanks. The Arabs and the Israelis had to find their weapons through arms dealers or from any country that would supply them. The first armored tanks and vehicles in Israel were, like many other countries, imported or based on others' designs. But eventually developed their own. But in Israel, plans to import them began before the country was even formed, and rudimentary armored cars and trucks were prepared in secret. The Palmach was an elite fighting force of the Haganah, the underground army of the Yishuv, Jewish community, and had been established on the 15th of May 1941. By the outbreak of the Israeli War for Independence in 1948, it consisted of over 2,000 men and women in 3 fighting brigades. Following the United Nations General Assembly vote for the partition plan for Palestine on the 29th of November 1947, the Jewish forces started to build and procure mobile armored cars and supply trucks and to purchase and bring in tanks and a large number of half-tracks to prepare for the termination of the British Mandate and Israeli proclamation of statehood on the 14th of May 1948. 1. During this period, the Jewish and Arab communities under the British Mandate clashed with only light arms, while the Jewish and Arab communities under the British Mandate clashed with only light arms, while the British intervened only on an occasional basis during their withdrawal. From January onwards, operations became increasingly militarized. A number of Arab Liberation Army regiments infiltrated into Palestine, each active in a variety of distinct sectors around the different coastal towns. They consolidated their presence in Galilee and Samaria. 2. The Army of the Holy War, under the command of Abd al-Qadir al-Husseini, came from Egypt with several hundred men. Having recruited a few thousand volunteers, al-Husseini organized the blockade of the 100,000 Jewish residents of Jerusalem. 3. To counter this, the Yishuv authorities tried to supply the city using convoys of up to 100 armored vehicles, but the operation became more and more impractical as the number of casualties in the relief convoys surged. By March, al-Husseini's tactic had paid off. Almost all of Haganah's armored vehicles had been destroyed, the blockade was in full operation, and hundreds of Haganah members who had tried to bring supplies into the city were killed. 4. The situation for those who dwelt in the Jewish settlements in the highly isolated Negev and north of Galilee was more critical. The Arab League began to believe that the Palestinian Arabs, reinforced by the Arab Liberation Army, could put an end to partition. The British decided on the 7th of February 1948 to support the annexation of the Arab part of Palestine by Jordan. 5. Ben-Gurion ordered Yigal Yadin to plan in preparation for the announced intervention of the Arab states. The result of his analysis was Plan Dalet, which was put in place from the start of April onwards. The adoption of Plan Dalet marked the second stage of the war, in which Haganah took the offensive and the stated purpose of which was to take control of the territory of the Jewish state and to defend its borders and people, including the Jewish population outside of the borders, in expectation of an invasion by regular Arab armies. 6. According to the Israeli Yehoshaphat Harkabi, Plan Dalet called for the conquest of Arab towns and villages inside and along the borders of the area allocated to the proposed Jewish state, according to the UN partition plan. 7. In case of resistance, the population of conquered villages was to be expelled outside the borders of the Jewish state. If no resistance was met, the residents could stay put, under military rule. The first operation, named Nakshon, was directed at lifting the blockade on Jerusalem. 12 armored cars and forces tried to clear out the roads and escort supply trucks as they tried to reach Jerusalem. The Arab attacks on communications and roads has intensified. The failure of the convoys and the loss of Jewish armored vehicles has shaken the Yishuv leaders' confidence. 1,500 men from Haganah's Givati Brigade and Palmach's Harel Brigade conducted sorties to free up the route to the city between the 5th of April and the 20th of April. The operation was successful, and enough foodstuffs to last 2 months were trucked into Jerusalem for distribution to the Jewish population. 13. The success of the operation was assisted by the death of al-Husseini in combat. At the same time, the large-scale operation of the Arab Liberation Army was defeated at Mishmar Hemek. 14. Their Druze allies left them through defection. 15. Within the framework of creating Jewish territorial continuity according to Plan Dalet, the forces of Haganah, Palmach and Irgun moved to consolidate areas with Jewish populations as the British had essentially withdrawn their troops. The situation pushed the leaders of the neighboring Arab states to intervene, with the Arab Legion of Transjordan's monarch, King Abdullah I moving tanks and armored forces into the territory of the British Mandate of Palestine. Preparing for Arab intervention from neighboring states, Haganah successfully launched operations Yiftah, 16, and Ben, Ami, 17, and with limited armored forces they tried to hold what areas they had under their control and sent forces to secure the Jewish settlements of Galilee, and Operation Kilshan and created an Israeli-controlled front around Jerusalem. With the creation of Israel's army, the 3 Palmach brigades were disbanded and its members formed the backbone of the Israel Defense Forces High Command for many years. The few tanks and armored cars of these brigades were the beginning of what was to become a long history of armored forces in the Israeli army. The military forces of Israel can trace its roots to Jewish paramilitary organizations in the New Yishuv, starting with the Second Aliyah, 1904 to 1914, and the Zion Mule Corps and the Jewish Legion of War World I, both of which were part of the British Army. After the 1920 Palestine riots against Jews in April 1920, the Yishuv's leadership saw the need to create a nationwide underground defense organization, and the Haganah was founded and became a full-scale defense force after the 1936-39 Arab Revolt in Palestine with an organized structure, consisting of 3 main units, the Field Corps, Guard Corps, and later the Palmach. In 1942, there was a period of great concern for the Yishuv, when the forces of German General Erwin Rommel advanced east in North Africa towards the Suez Canal and there was fear that they would conquer Palestine. This event was the direct cause for the founding, with British support, of the Palmach, 18. A highly trained regular unit belonging to Haganah, a paramilitary group that was mostly made up of reserve troops. During World War II, the successor to the Jewish Legion of World War I was the Jewish Brigade. Later, veterans of the Jewish Brigade became key participants of the new state of Israel's Israel Defense Forces. The modern military forces, the IDF, was founded following the establishment of the State of Israel, after Defense Minister and Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion issued an order on the 26th of May 1948. In 1946, Ben-Gurion had decided that the Yishuv would probably have to defend itself against both the Palestinian Arabs and neighboring Arab states and accordingly began a massive, covert arms acquisition campaign in the West.
By September 1947 the Haganah had 10,489 rifles, 702 light machine guns, 2,666 submachine guns, 186 medium machine guns, 672 2-inch mortars and 92 3-inch 76mm mortars, and acquired many more during the first few months of hostilities. Initially, the Haganah had no heavy machine guns, artillery, armored vehicles, anti-tank or anti-aircraft weapons, 20 nor military aircraft or tanks. 21. In the United States, Yishuv agents purchased 3 B-17 bombers, and dozens of half-tracks, which were repainted and defined as agricultural equipment. In Western Europe, Haganah agents amassed guns and mortars but most importantly 10 H-35 light tanks, and a large number of half-tracks. The Israelis also got 2 Cromwell tanks from sympathizers at an arms depot in the Haifa port area, which would form the basis of the Israeli Armored Corps.
Then on the 14th of May 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel to be known as the State of Israel, a few hours before the termination of the mandate at midnight in conflict with Arab irregulars as well as forces of the neighboring Arab states, Egypt, Jordan, Transjordan, and Syria, invaded what had just ceased to be the territory of the British Mandate, 22, 23, and immediately attacked Jewish settlements, 24. The Israeli tank force included a small number of Sherman and Cromwell tanks, as well as 10 Hotchkiss H-39 light tanks. Egypt used Shermans, Crusaders and Matildas, as well as light tank Mark 6 and M22 Locust light tanks. They may have used some Valentines, as well. The Syrians had Renault R-35s and R-39s, and improved R-35. The Lebanese used Renault FTs. The new Army of Israel organized itself quickly during the ensuing 1948 Arab-Israeli War as the neighboring Arab states attacked Israel. 12 infantry and armored brigades formed: Golani, Carmeli, Alexandroni, Kiryati, Gavati, Etzioni, the 7th and 8th Armored Brigades, Oded, Harel, Yiftach, and Negev. 25. Some of the armored brigades formed during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War had Sherman tanks and mounted infantry, and some also contained an artillery element. One of the brigades, the 7th Armored Brigade, Hebrew Hativa Shiva, was the main force in the battles of Latrun. Facing them was the forces of the Egypt's army, which in 1948 was able to put a maximum of around 40,000 men into the field. Initially, an expeditionary force of 10,000 men was sent to Palestine, consisting of 5 infantry battalions, 1 armored battalion equipped with British light tank MKV and Matilda tanks, 1 battalion of 16 25-pounder guns, a battalion of 8 6-pounder guns, and 1 medium machine gun battalion with supporting troops. 26. The other main force facing Israel was Jordan's Arab Legion, which was considered the most effective Arab force. Armed, trained and commanded by British officers, this 8,000 to 12,000 strong force was organized in 4 infantry, mechanized regiments supported by some 40 artillery pieces and 75 armored cars. 27. Until January 1948, it was reinforced by the 3,000-strong Transjordan Frontier Force. 28. As many as 48 British officers served in the Arab Legion. 29. Glub Pasha was the commander of the Legion. The Arab Legion joined the war in May 1948, but fought only in the areas that King Abdullah wanted to secure for Jordan, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. On the 14th of May, Syria invaded Israel with the 1st Infantry Brigade supported by a battalion of armored cars, a company of French R-35 and R-39 tanks, an artillery battalion and other units. However, within a week it had been halted in a series of battles around Degania. 30. The heaviest fighting occurred in Jerusalem and on the Jerusalem-Tel Aviv road, between Jordan's Arab Legion and Israeli forces. 31. After the 1948 war, the Israel Defense Forces shifted to low-intensity conflict against Arab Palestinians.